Um, so I wanted to just, I think everyone here has been to other um, sessions, other workshops that we've held to introduce people to the compass, the Revolutionary Love Compass. And so I won't spend a lot of time going over that, but I do think that as we were talking earlier about our interdependence when it comes to our own health and safety and the health and safety of others, that is really what we are lifting up with Valerie's visit and with our engagement in the work that she has challenged us to do and also given us the tools to do. And since we do have a small group today, maybe we'll have a little more time for conversation about it. But today we're talking about the point on the compass that's titled Reimagine. And we're so fortunate to have Alan with us today, who is the president and CEO of the Child Poverty Action Lab here in Dallas. And Alan really exemplifies someone who has reimagined a future for children, all children, but especially children living in poverty, and has applied his incredible intelligence and experience to using tools that can help people who might be resistant to reimagining those futures come to a place of possibility and openness. And so, and I had coffee with Alan recently, and he was talking about the kinds of situations he goes into and listens in. Last week we talked about listening and talking about going to the back of a school board meeting and listening to what parents are saying, or a PTA meeting and listening to what parents are saying, a school board meeting to hear what community members and school board members are saying, and taking that into account when trying to figure out, strategize how to help people feel interconnected and interdependent instead of at odds with each other and opposed to each other, is really inspiring, Alan. So thank you for being with us today. And I would love to hear you talk about your feeling about your own work and how you've been able to use um, your own qualities of heart and mind to feel connected to people who might be very different than you, both clients that you're trying to serve as well as partners that you're trying to encourage to participate in the work to change the systems and create a different future.
Well, thanks for letting me be part of the conversation. That's a big question, but I mean, I'll just kind of say, I do a work with this organization that helps get started called the Child Poverty Action Lab. We had put together a North Star of saying we want to reduce child poverty by 50% within a single generation. I think most of the folks on this call will probably seen headlines along lines of as we've had an expanded child tax credit in this country, we've actually seen close to a 50% decrease in child poverty based off of the supplemental poverty measure. So we have a new mission, which is to reduce child poverty by another 50% within a single generation. The work kind of never ends, but that's a very complicated set of strategies for how we do that. And it seems like a very simple statement, like we should just be rid of poverty. And I think that's really what I would say to focus in on is where are these points where there's going to be a lot of broad consensus, even among somebody that you likely disagree with. I mean, my ultimate vision, right, what I'd like to see as point B in this sort of journey from point A to point B is I'd love to see a world, a Dallas and a country and a world where you don't have a kid that ever has to go to sleep worried about whether they're going to have a meal the next day or worried about whether they're going to have a roof over their head. And that's a very simple idea. and I think what I'm okay with and comfortable with is having a huge debate on how we get from point A to point B. But I think we've got to remember that there's a lot more consensus on point B than among those that we might sometimes frame as our opponents than we often give credit for. And you got to start from a place of not assuming motivations, but starting to understand what are the experiences, what is the reality that different people are living in, why do they believe the things that they believe, and more than likely, when you start breaking down problems into smaller and smaller pieces, and you start breaking down people's lives into smaller and smaller pieces, you're going to find, just based off of a core level of humanism, that there's some things that you can agree with almost everybody. And we've just got to actually practice collaboration and practice building off of those things we agree on, instead of focusing so much on points of disagreement.
Well, what do you find are some of the limiting assumptions that have prevented you from making progress or made it harder to make progress? I mean, the tax credit is something that was offered by the federal government. It was not embraced by a lot of the people that you work with day to day. So how do you get, what are the strategies? There might be a consensus on point B, but what are some of the limiting assumptions that have been preventing us from getting there faster?
So yeah, look, I mean, it takes a lot of different levels, and the tax credit's one example of something that was pushed down from kind of a federal level. But look, there's a couple principles that we sort of hold true in the work. One is that you have to stay really focused on actually how residents are experiencing the world, right, and including systems. So, for example, here's what actually allowed the tax credit to have such a huge impact was the way it was delivered, not the fact that it was the dollar amount was expanded, but actually what we did is with as a government is we just started putting money into people's banks based off of records that we already had, as opposed to, let's take a different example. Let's take SNAP or food stamps, right? And we've seen different efforts that through policy have expanded the amount of dollars or expanded the eligibility for something like food stamps. And I'm just going to tell you that we stand side by side with residents all the time that will tell you, I've got to go through, 50 clicks on the website, or I don't have internet to even sign up for food stamps. So there's some real realities and barriers that we can start to break down. And it has to do with being really obsessive about breaking down a problem into someone's actual experiences in life, and kind of taking this human-centered approach to the problem. The other thing is this, and folks and they tend to be, a lot of my best friends are very interested in approaching problems from a place of inclusiveness. And inclusiveness has become kind of this buzzword in the social sector and in nonprofit circles. And I just want to make sure that we don't think of inclusiveness as a synonym for do nothing until everybody in the world agrees with that we've got the perfect plan. That we need to be more data driven. We need to actually understand sort of what does the evidence say will work, right? Like I was listening to a conversation about masks before we started recording, right? Like it's good to look at like the best evidence on what might work and sort of what the science says. But it's also really important that some of that data be market feedback, that we start doing something and see if it works or not, knowing that almost any intervention we try, like pre-K, the evidence says really well done pre-K is gonna work for kids, okay? But if we sit around in a circle and try to come up with every possible scenario of how to implement perfect pre-K before we just get the classrooms open, we'll be talking for years and years and years. Let's get the classrooms open. Let's get kids into pre-K, and then let's use the market feedback to continuously improve and improve and improve. And let's not make issues binary. Something is all good or all bad. pre-K can be great, but we have all seen examples of bad pre-K. So let's have a little bit of nuance and say we want pre-K, and we also want to make sure that teachers have this type of training, and we want to make sure that the classrooms are flush with these kinds of materials and books and et cetera, and continue to improve and improve and improve based off of the feedback. And when you start breaking problems into small pieces instead of just everything is all good or all bad, you can get into a cycle of improvement versus righteousness.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and certainly the lived experience would indicate that. But we are, I think one of the potential downsides of the data driven approach is that people are eager to look for the failures, and to say, here we invested such and such amount, and we haven't achieved the results that we had promised. So how do you continue to lift up the vision and to pursue that vision, to encourage people to buy into that vision when you're not always achieving 100% success in everything that you're doing?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think you got to start with the understanding that this is going to be really, really hard, and this is a journey. And actually, if there was a single ingredient that I tend to certainly look for in people that I hire to be my teammates in this work, and that I look for in those that I am most interested in collaboration with, is endurance. But I think the world gets changed by those that stick in and stay, even when the newspaper isn't writing the headlines about it. In fact, it's usually easier to make progress when there aren't a whole bunch of people paying attention all at the same time. And it's not just this, there's a lot of beehive soccer in like policy in the social sector. Oh, this made headlines today. This is what I watched on cable news. Now, all of my friends are sort of running towards the soccer ball all at the same time, just like we saw with 6, 7-year-olds playing the game, right? And then it's really hard to know what to do, and they turn into these very I'm on this team and you're on that team kind of discussions. And I just think it's collaboration is really, really hard. I mean, it's really hard. And some of the folks that have figured out how to do really powerful work, not just in the social sector, but in any sector, have figured out that structuring collaboration takes a lot of intentionality. In the business world, by the way, when two companies decide that they want to quote unquote collaborate or like merge, we hire M&A attorneys and give them like literally millions of dollars to help the businesses on how to collaborate. And a lot of times in like these policy conversations or in the social sector, we like pass out big pieces of paper and sticky dots. And then we're like, okay, we ought to just be able to collaborate there. We spent, $30 at Office Mart. So it's hard, and we've got to put the intentionality and the resources against collaboration.
Well, and I think to your point, we have been so driven by the profit metric, and sort of a measuring success in terms of investment of capital resources and financial resources. And what I think the work of the Revolutionary Love Project holds up is the importance of the metric of feeling safe and secure and appreciated and valued, which doesn't have that same encouragement or social value anymore. And I think what we're trying to do by spreading this understanding of all these different compass points, the importance of being curious about people, the importance of relating to their grief and your own grief in the face of living life in a way that isn't the way we want it to be or the way that feels comfortable. the importance of acknowledging rage and anger, the importance of fighting for things that are important, of um, all of these points are human qualities that have been um, undervalued or leapfrogged because of the ways that our society has been functioning. And then, of course, COVID has reinforced that by 10 times because of the isolation that it has required. So, again, I think the work that you're doing is so integrally related to real relationship and bringing people into proximity who might not otherwise be proximate with one another. Um, so I don't know if you have any good examples of how
Yeah.
bringing people together has, physically or intimately, however you do it, has been able to create a new norm of the way people were thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, I can give you a few examples. So first of all, you said a lot there, so I'm gonna try to break this down
Sorry.
into a couple. No, no, it was great. It was great. So like one of the things you started by kind of talking about like profit motives, and so one of the things I just encourage, right, is a lot of times we evaluate or we debate policies or interventions or the how based off of the goal that the policy ascribes. And sometimes we got to pay more attention to the incentives that different policies kind of create, right? And if we focus on incentives, there are these solutions that just sort of happen in really, really powerful ways. So, for example, I'm geeking out right now. I do a lot of work in criminal justice. Criminal justice system is not always sometimes the word justice is used a little bit loosely in the system. But what they looked at in the Carolinas was criminal defendants. They had, for the longest time, paid public defenders by the case. And they made a shift in how they funded public defenders. They started funding them by the hour, started paying them by the hour instead of by the case. And lo and behold, the number of people that went to jail started going down, right? Because we changed the incentive. The incentive was no longer, let me just get this case off my desk. I'm going to try to get the quickest plea bargain I can possibly get. This started being by the hour, and the defenders were starting to look at the specifics of the case, and it was no longer in their best interest to just get the case off their desk. Now they could do what they got into the law to do, which is really provide the very best defense for folks caught up in the system. And that leads to this outcome that I think we should genuinely ascribe to. Less families were being split up because people were going to jail for things that they really weren't guilty of or that weren't causing a threat to larger society. So that's really important. The other thing that I'll just kind of say, which is kind of core to the question, which is people that are in kind of different surroundings, like how do we get them to listen to one another? I'm just going to use like sort of, why don't I like to make fun of cable news a lot. I don't really like cable news, but one of the biggest stories in cable news, I guess, gosh, it's going on. I don't want to say how many years ago now, because it's going to make me feel like time is going too fast. But remember when at the exact same moment, cable news was covering Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party? Like, remember that? And they're like on completely different ends theoretically of the political spectrum. Well, if you listen to the core message of both those movements, they're saying a lot of the same things about capitalism. Here's what they were also doing, though. They were creating caricatures of other people across America that they didn't really know, that they didn't have relationships with, and dehumanizing a lot of folks in the process. And that led to the inability for us to have any kind of meaningful conversation about the places where the system was falling apart, because instead it got focused on people instead of the systems and sort of our misperceptions and again dehumanizing. So this virtue of humanizing, this virtue of compassion, this virtue of humanism, I don't care whether you're talking about the history of America or you're talking about histories of nations all throughout history, and I mean world history. The greatest thinkers of our throughout all the texts that I've ever read, secular, religious, etc., all come back to some level of compassion and humanism at the core of the message. And what we tend to find out is that somebody experiencing poverty in rural America, what do they care about? Am I going to be able to feed my kids? Am I going to be able to keep the roof over my head? Somebody experiencing poverty in urban America cares about, am I going to be able to feed my kids? Am I going to be able to keep a roof over my head? There is a lot to agree on.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, that is exactly why we're doing this work, because the kinds of things that you're doing with Child Poverty Action Lab, the kinds of things that Sarah does at Literacy Achieves, these are things that these are ways for people to get to know each other better, to feel safe and secure within their context of work and life, to understand that there are people who care about them, and to see their own self-care as being integrated into the care for others in our community. But it's a lot of work. I mean, as you say, we have to keep uh, exercising those muscles. And you're such an amazing example of a leader who is doing this with a high profile position now. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh, we're just one individual doing our work in our office, or in our homes now. What do we have to lend to this project? How can we be a leader in this? What I think Valerie Kaur's tools do is it really democratizes that work and makes us each kind of responsible for hanging on to the vision and sharing that vision wherever we go, in our families, in our congregations, in our workplaces, in the grocery store, when people come to work in our homes, wherever it is, and it does, that's what makes it a revolution. So I wanted to leave time now for people to either make comments, ask questions, while we have a few more minutes. Anyone else? I'm guessing someone else on this call has an example of holding up a vision and finding out, being surprised and gratified to see that vision is met with enthusiasm and gratitude from people that we may not have thought would respond that way.
I'll fill some dead air here, but I just to simply just say, look, there's a lot that is going right in Dallas, and there's a lot that's going right in the country as well, and that doesn't mean we should stop pointing out the massive need for improvement. But like, take an issue like public safety in this city. I just, like, for whatever it's worth, right, less people lost lives because of gun violence last year in Dallas. And that's a huge, while the rest of the country was seeing, by and large, increases in gun violence. Just that's a really important thing to point out. Now, I care a lot about gun violence because I really believe it's hard to go into neighborhoods where opportunity has been fleeting and focus on education and focus on creating jobs, not when violence is present. And so I feel like, there's a lot of strategies that we can put into place, but this started by bringing together a lot of stakeholders that don't agree on an awful lot. And how do we get the police into the same room as the anti-police activists? How do we get the Mothers Against Gun Violence rep in the same room as the far right? Like, I'm going to defend the Second Amendment with every bit of gusto I possibly have. And it's just simply by focusing on what do we agree on. What we agree on is that murder is bad. Okay? And if you agree on that, then you can start working on some solutions. Whether that's things as simple as we're going to start putting up street lights in areas where there's a lot of gun violence at night, or whether it's things like we're going to listen to neighborhoods that are asking for more police officers to be present in their neighborhoods, even if that's not what I'm reading on cable news. So there are good things that can happen if we bring people together and listen. And anyway, I think we're out of time, but just thanks everybody for inviting me to the conversation.
Alan, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to helping to lift up your work and promote it and um, expand it, because you really have figured out so many great ways to bring people together to change certain kinds of systems and challenge assumptions, challenge the limiting assumptions just by your endurance, your perseverance. And we have a lot to learn from you. You know, after the inauguration last year, Biden's inauguration, Valerie Kaur did a 10-day people's inauguration. And I think, you know, that again, we've got to all kind of take responsibility for this and, you know, and recognize that we each have a role to play in persevering in our vision of a reality that is safer, kinder, more compassionate for everybody.
Yeah, well, thanks. And also just since I'm coming in and out of the conversation, I also just want to say congratulations to George. I just, coming off of your announcement, the response from, all corners of Dallas is both appropriate and just scratching the surface.
Thank you so much. It has been gratifying, and to join Nancy's thanks to you. We are really proud of all you're up to, and that we get to share in some of that work too. And I will be able to, even beyond being the senior pastor at Wilshire. So, yeah.
Well, and I do, yeah, I mean, great point, because George, through reimagining what a Baptist congregation in the buckle of the Bible Belt could be for people, lifted up a vision that has had incredible impact. And I do trust and expect that that work will be shared more broadly and more collaboratively with other groups and institutions, because now you'll have more time to do that.
That's right. And Faith Commons is an example of that as well. The work that I get to do with Nancy and in our community is about reimagining and reimagining the faith traditions working together instead of competitively. And that's been beautiful.
And it's important to keep bringing people together to remind ourselves and each other that we exist and we are each other's champions and partners and friends.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Great. Well, I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has anything they want to share. But we'll, in the meantime, look forward to next week when Daniel Ayers from Friendship West Baptist Church will be joining us, and we'll be breathing.
That's right. Thanks again, Alan.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Kimberlane.
Okay. Well, that was a good ending that I caught.
Yeah, that's very sweet.